Dillon.
And I'm Fortune.
And this is Cinescussion. Welcome to episode 4 that I'm very excited about. This was one that I was able to choose due to Quentin Tarantino's new book, his novelization of his new movie.
And we both love Tarantino. And Tarantino is actually my favorite writer-director, so I have no issue.
Yep. So it all worked out. So with the novelization that recently came out of Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, which I had the ability and privilege to read over the last couple weeks, it gave me the idea that I would love to talk about new Hollywood films, specifically from the late 1960s to the early 1970s. And if you've had a chance to see the film Once Upon a Time in Hollywood or read the book, you'll understand that that movie and this novel is a celebration of that time period.
Yeah.
You know.
Did it go through to the late 1970s or the early?
Early. I misspoke.
Oh, so
mid 1970s.
Okay, gotcha.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Thank you.
No, it's fine. I'm just double checking because I learned a lot more about this for this episode. Admittedly, I was really happy that you recommended this because the truth is, even though I see lots of films and I love films, this specific era was one that I have seen very few films from. I've seen Apocalypse Now when I was like 15. I need to watch that again, honestly. But I've also seen Taxi Driver, which I did love. I've seen the Godfather trilogy. But outside of those like 5 films, I don't know if I can name. I can name a lot of the films that are in this, but I don't think I've seen a lot of them. It's like an era that I'm very ignorant on in terms of like my watch time. So it was a really fun recommendation for me, just because like I was like so many of them I haven't seen that a lot of them were already on my list. So it was just about like picking the ones from this era that I finally needed to watch. So
yeah, I love to hear it. I'm gonna misquote Anthony Bourdain for a moment, but he has a quote that I really relate to along the lines of always having to fight with yourself to remain productive and not lay around the house and watch old movies all day. And I relate to that because I can watch movies from the 1960s and 1970s all day. Very easily. And in fact, this podcast gave me an excuse to do just that. So, that all worked out.
It's funny because I mentioned that we were going to be doing this episode with my mother, and my mother's seen them all too. Like every one that I listed, she's seen, I think, like all of them except like the Sorcerer. So like all of them, and Network. She hadn't seen Network, but like she was like, "Oh, that's a good one. Oh, that's a good one." Like she loves this era too. So yeah, she was like, "Oh, that'll be a fun one." Like,
yep. Well, your mom clearly has good taste.
Yes, she does. I like movies because of her, so I can't say.
Oh, no kidding. I didn't know that.
We didn't have a lot of money. Let me put it this way. Single mom raised me. She had a good job. We did fine. We had what we needed, but nothing extra. So movies and TV were affordable. So like some good food and movies were something we could always do. Like I watched sci-fi movies when I was a kid, and other parents wouldn't let their kids watch stuff. I'd come to school as a 3rd grader and I was watching like Aliens and Predator, and like she doesn't like horror movies, but she likes like scary alien stuff and monster movies she's fine with. So like I loved those as a kid. Actually. And she actually loved Star Trek, Star Wars, like all those. Like like I grew up just seeing a lot of stuff that my mom liked, and one of the reasons I love movies is actually my mom, because it was something we did together.
Nice. So we have a little bit of that in common. Not so much the doing together as much part, but the having just enough to get by, and the movies being an affordable escape all the time. Also grew up with a single mom, so I totally relate, and that's kind of carried on my adulthood.
And grandma really helped out, because like we got to see the movies with my mom, but my grandma would be the ones who'd foot the bill, like if she wanted to take me to movies sometimes. And then the other cool thing is my grandparents were retired, so they had like HBO Stars, all these channels that my mom couldn't afford. So whenever I would get dropped off at their house, I would ask mom if she could take me to the store, and she'd have enough money to buy me a few blank tapes. And I would record movies from HBO Stars, and then I'd bring them home, and I'd be like, "Mom, I got all these movies." And she'd be like, "Awesome, let's make some popcorn and watch them."
I think the FBI asks you not to do that.
No, like it was totally fine. As a matter of fact, the VHS said "record with love."
Right.
So, my Memorex VHS at the time.
But we're gonna kick this off and talk.
I'm joking, by the way.
I know none of that happened. That was all.
That was all a joke for this podcast.
Wink, that was all hypothetical.
Completely. Wink, wink.
Right. We have many parents. But we're going to kick things off. We're going to talk a little bit about the era and what the era meant to movies back then, movies today, and the things we specifically love around it, we're going to jump into a little bit about Quentin Tarantino's new book, which I read. But Fortune set up some questions that he's going to ask me. So
For sure.
Kind of
I did buy it on Audible, but since I have seen the movie, like, it takes me longer to get to something like that if I do know the base story. Like, like if it had been a completely new novel, I would have been all into it. That's just kind of how my mind works. Like, if I know the ending, even if I enjoy it, I'm less enthused about like checking it out right now. That's why I tell people, please don't ruin games and stuff for me when I'm playing.
I know.
Because I'll stop playing it. I'll literally just stop. Like,
no, ruining a game or a book, to me, even though I like movies more traditionally, it's so much worse for me to have one of those things spoiled, because a novel or a video game is such a longer time commitment.
That's exactly my thing. Yeah.
It's like you have so much time to spoil me.
Just like I hate ruining a TV show more than a movie too, because you spend hours and hours getting to the climax, and with a movie it's a couple hours, so I'm irritated. But like with a game, it's like I'm putting all this time in, and now I have to put more effort to finish it now that I know the ending, and I don't want to. I'd rather just move on to something else. So, yeah.
Exactly. And then after we talk about the book, we're going to talk about a few of the movies that we watched over the last couple weeks. Admittedly, Fortune, with me reading this book, Fortune had a little more time than I do to watch more movies, but all of them except for one, which we'll get to later, I've seen already, anyway. So we're going to kick it off, and I'm kind of excited to hear, I'm going to gush about this time in filmmaking a little bit. But before the podcast, you were talking and you were saying, and you just mentioned it before, that you weren't super familiar with this time within Hollywood, within filmmaking, and you had a chance to dive in and do a whole bunch of research on why the movies were the way they were and how we got to that point.
Sure.
And I kind of want to hear a little bit about your take on the trends of the films you watched, how you felt about it, and a little bit about what you learned.
Sure. So, like, I knew it was a revolutionary era, but that was kind of all I knew. I didn't really know why. And I'm very much a why person. So for this, I did some research. And apparently, before this era, for like 20, 30 years, like, there were still some great films, but they were all very sterile in the sense that they were typically happy ending films. Studios only allowed certain things to happen. Like, almost everything was studio controlled. So you can imagine a lot of happy ending films, a lot of musicals, a lot of things like that where the studios, it fits the algorithm. Generally, they're fun, they're nice, but from a creativity standpoint, there's a lot you weren't allowed to do, really, right? And essentially, there was a huge case that kind of, from what I've read, it kind of started this new wave. It was kind of like the catalyst of this in a way. It was basically, I believe the case was called United States versus Paramount Pictures, Inc. Some people just called it the Paramount case. Essentially, the way it was back there is there was kind of like an oligopoly going on back then, which essentially basically means like a small group of large sellers owned the entire business, right? So basically the way that it was the studios would produce the films, they distribute them, but they distribute them into theaters that they also owned, which means that the theaters could choose which movies played and which didn't. And as you can imagine, they would always play their studio's films, right?
Right.
Which isn't really a great fair practice. And as you can imagine, anything from like a lot of foreign places and stuff didn't come as often and stuff like that because they would control what was seen. Yeah. Basically, government was like, hey, this isn't working, because it's basically what they called it was called vertically integrated. So basically that's what created the oligopoly. So they were like, okay, so here's the thing. This isn't fair. So what we're going to do is we're going to split this up. So you can either choose to own the theaters or you could choose to own the film production and distribution, right? So basically, as you can imagine, most places chose to keep producing the films because that's like the center portion of all of it. But a huge part of the theaters was their profit margins. So as you can imagine, now they had issues, right, that they had to deal with. So Technicolor and a bunch of all these inventions were basically created to try to get people into the theater, into the seats, because now they were competing with television, and television was kind of booming at the time. So what this kind of ended up allowing, so to speak, was suddenly, I imagine part of this was also that, other companies own the theaters now. So, French New Wave films showed up over here now. Japanese films, more spaghetti westerns started showing up. The ones from like Italy and stuff as well, like you were talking about. Yeah. So suddenly you start getting all these really different influences on our film market, right? And then there's all these indie filmmakers that, like at that time, I don't think indie filmmaker was a term, but all these independent films, so to speak, start popping up because now, I think there's space for them to try to rent out these theaters and markets, and it's also good to try to get some just new blood in there because everybody felt like things were stale. Everything was a happy ending. Everything was the same.
Yeah.
It gets kind of boring. Even if it's a fun movie, it gets boring when you can just predict everything all the time, right? So suddenly, there's the birth of, essentially, I would argue that this was kind of like the birth of independent filmmaking in a way. Like the indie filmmakers started showing up. People started having conversations that like, the good directors make good movies. It's not about a studio of a bunch of heads coming together and making a project, which some would argue is kind of happening now a lot. It seems like that's kind of happening a lot now, but luckily we at least have an independent film market where you can go to get meatier, a lot of times better stuff. Also, television's now like killing it. So now a lot of really great stories that films that feel are riskier to make are now being made on television and networks and stuff. So it just seems like this new Hollywood wave was like a rebellion against the stale vanilla-ness of film. So you have all these great filmmakers who are coming out making all these films with really tragic endings or maybe really taboo subjects, which I love. I love talking about things that might make us uncomfortable. Like I love films like that where afterward you're having conversations just like, can you believe this shit?
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And then you even have like you just have they even have like art house pictures. I read about some directors that would actually like create their own theater. I think there was a theater in New York called Cinema 16 that was owned by, I believe, a filmmaking duo where they screen their own stuff, right? And stuff like that. So it was just this new age of film that just revolutionized film, and it changed it forever. I mean, now indie filmmaking is a thing. It's an entire industry of its own, and it's even marketable to some extent because even big production studios now have like Fox Searchlight. It's our indie film branch, but it's still a corporate. But it's like they're indie, like it's where like the directors that want to do more stuff that's maybe not so commercialized and more mainstream can like get their stuff produced and made. So it seems like this era really, really did kick off a lot of, I'll just say, interesting things. So like learning that, it totally makes sense why so many of these films were so risky. I mean, you got films like Taxi Driver and Dog Day Afternoon and Mean Streets and you have all these
Scorsese.
Exactly. Right. So yeah, like it was just really fascinating to learn why this era exists and how influential it has been to everything that we know now. Like it's pretty amazing.
Totally. I love all that. I wasn't super familiar with the court case that led to those distribution practices. But what I love about the era is a lot of what you said. For me, this has always felt like that time in movie history where directors were started to be seen as artists. They were starting to have influence over the piece of art that they were making. Where prior to that, 1950s, it was very much studio driven. Like you said, we have a lot of that now.
Yeah.
Where it's strictly on marketability.
Yeah.
And that's never going to change with like, movies.
Get this celebrity, this plus this plus
this
equals success. And then demographics and then age ranges. And it's like a giant algorithm, basically.
Yeah. And in a way that those boundaries have been pushed. But at the end of the day, film, in a lot of way, as an art piece, is kind of a working man's medium. It's always been very controlled. It's always been...
Because it is a business, and I do understand that.
It's very much a business. It's a lot of collaboration. It's a lot of moving parts. So it's very difficult to have a visionary artist in that setting.
Yeah.
I think Stanley Kubrick once said that the hardest part about directing a film is getting out of the car. And he said... He said a lot of it is like trying to write War and Peace on a car bumper in a carnival. You're just trying to put everything together.
I feel that. I've done small projects and directing, even though I enjoy it, it is the most stressful job I've ever done. Because everyone's expecting you to have an answer for every problem. And you can't know the answer for everything. You just do your best based on what you know, and you do your best in pre-production to make sure that everyone understands your vision, everyone understands what the themes and the films are about. So that when you do run into trouble as a director, the stuff that they offer up as advice is in the right vein because they know what you want. It really is a collaboration. It's a series of, it's one director who oversees other directors who oversee each of their crews. And it's really like everyone coming together, and it's the director's job to make sure that everyone knows exactly what we're doing so that when they're making their decisions, the film comes out right.
Right.
And if you don't explain yourself, well, that's why, like, you know, directors who, a lot of them talk a lot. It can be annoying. I can be annoying, but like, one positive thing about that is that's usually good for a director, right? Because explaining your vision's everything, right?
It is everything. Exactly. You have to hire people to make the vision.
Yeah, exactly.
But this was the time where, you know, prior to this era, a lot of it, actually, this isn't a lot of, all of character morality in film was overseen by the MPAA. There weren't things that were traditionally as morally gray as you would expect outside of film noir, you know, but whether it be depictions of police or gangsters, it was all very regulated.
Yep. This
was the era where we started seeing anti-heroes, which is kind of, it's almost a cliche at this point, but during this film, it was during this era, it was one of those times where everything was boundary pushing. And when you tend to cross a boundary in any medium, people don't tend to tiptoe over that line. They tend to gun it over that line. So a lot of these movies tend to be so over the top with their depictions of violence and immorality and all of these things.
And sexuality.
Well. Yeah, big time. That's a huge one as well. It's all so far over the line because it's saying this is a new era and we're going to break these boundaries, because if this is my vision and my art, these are the things that I want to talk about. And not only do I want to talk about it, I haven't been allowed to talk about it.
Yeah.
In this kind of, in this way before.
It's like, so now that I'm getting to, also I can imagine for them at the time, they might have even thought, who knows how long this is going to last, right? So I'm going to make everything I can right now in case it changes.
Yeah, they didn't. I was watching a couple interviews on one of the films I watched that we'll talk about later, The Wild Bunch. And one of the side characters is played by Ernest Borgnine. And he's talking about a conversation he had with Sam Peckinpah, the director, who is one of kind of the iconic directors of this era.
Okay.
And the end of this film has a huge, huge bloody shootout. And on top of that, the cast of characters that you follow in this film are murderers and bastards and just terrible people. And it
sounds interesting.
It's great. I'll get into it. But it ends in this big bloody shootout. And Borgnine was talking about a conversation he had with Sam Peckinpah, how he came onto the set that day really head down.
For sure.
And, you know, he said, hey, what's going on? We're getting ready for this shoot. It's going to be, you know, the big battle scene. And he says, you know, like, I don't know how people are going to receive this. I don't know if this is going to be too much for a lot of audiences. I'm not, you know, feeling the best about it. And Borgnine responded, well, Sam, what the hell do you care? You know? You're not responsible for how people feel about this.
It's about
this
your vision, right?
Exactly. So. And just get it done. And this was the get it done era.
Yeah.
Get duct tape, get scraps, figure out how to make a movie and make it about what you want. Yeah. And we got some really incredible stories.
And that was another thing I read that someone put, I think it was a no film school thing, had mentioned that, like, some people were saying like, you know, people spoke out, and it was like, once they started seeing these films, some of them don't look as polished and professional, but like, they have heart to them. Like you felt more with that film than you felt with the pretty film. Like, you know, like you take that any day, and hey, now that those are good, why don't you let them have the people from your studio and make it pretty and still make that kind of stuff, you know, like, and I think that's a beautiful thing, right? Like, yeah,
like you said, prior, I'm going to use the Western genre as an example, you know, right when this era was kicking off, the American film market in a lot of ways was expanded upon by the foreign film market, the spaghetti westerns, a lot of films out of Japan, the French New Wave, all of these things. Yeah. And if you look at westerns in the early 1960s or late 1950s, everybody, at least United States westerns, this is, I mean, there were westerns in Germany before Italy and who were kind of on this road a little bit, but United States westerns, everybody had clean pressed clothes, upbeat music.
Very boring, honestly, to me. Like I
found
a lot of it boring. For me,
I can see where you feel that way, because it's all so manicured.
Yeah,
you know.
Yeah.
And then you get Sergio Leone and Kabuki. You get the Dollars trilogy, and all of a sudden,
Once Upon a Time in the West is like one of my favorite movies.
Absolutely,
like, it's so good.
Not only are these movies, you're not only seeing visually tattered clothing and gritty characters and blood and violence and all of these things
that actually feel real.
but a lot of the stars of the era, right after these movies started coming out, a lot of the stars of those like 1950s and 60s like war films and westerns, you start seeing them again in Western movies in America after this Italian and Japanese influence as cold-blooded killers. You see William Holden in The Wild Bunch. You see Lee Van Cleef in the Dollars trilogy. You see these characters where you're like used to seeing them as like goody two-shoes.
Yeah.
And then the first thing William Holden says in The Wild Bunch, there's a robbery scene. It shows a close-up of his face.
Yeah.
People at the time know this actor. It zooms in and he says, if he moves, kill him.
And you're just
like, what am I watching?
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Hey everybody, Fortune here. I just want to clarify something. In the next couple of seconds, I say antagonist. I actually meant to say protagonist, and I say antagonist twice by accident. So, oopsie, but just giving you a heads up. All right, bye.
And that's awesome. It's proof that, like, you don't need a good guy to be the lead of the film. That's why I think I had someone recently who said, okay, you guys, and he was like arguing with someone, and he said, you know, the protagonist equals good guy of the film, antagonist equals bad guy. And I'm like, that's actually not what I learned in film school. The antagonist is the character that moves the story forward.
Right,
you know,
exactly.
Like, so technically, there can be a film where there's a good guy and a bad guy, but you could argue that the villain is actually the one moving the story forward. The villain's the antagonist. You could totally make that argument. I mean, and just like back in the day, they used to say you have to make your character likable. No. You know what? You have to make them interesting.
Exactly.
If they're interesting. I mean, look at Dexter. Dexter was awesome. Like, and he's super likable, kind of, but like not really. He's kind of awful. Like, but
and he's very socially awkward. And,
super.
Like,
but his humor was so funny. Like, honestly, his like kind of psychopathic jokes that you would hear him mentally going through sometimes had me dying. But yeah, like he's interesting, right? Like. I think we've proven time and time again, interesting wins over good guy. Like,
absolutely.
So like, if you want to make a good guy that people like, make him interesting. Like, you know what I mean? Like, give him something interesting. You know?
Yep.
So.
Yep. So with that, I'm tempted to jump into the movies that we watched, but I know
I know
that we want to save that for later.
We will.
But a lot of I do kind of want to touch on those directors who were kind of putting things together at the time.
For sure.
I mentioned Sam Peckinpah. The Wild Bunch is his biggest project that he made. He also made Straw Dogs, which, oddly enough, I've seen the remake for. I saw it a few years ago, but I never saw the original.
Didn't the remake have, like, James Marsden in it?
It did. And it was, I watched it, and it was fine. It was brutal, and it was kind of came out during that, like, really violent, like a lot of people called it like torture porn era. Yeah. You know what I mean? Because it is a very violent movie in that way.
Like Funny Games and like Hostel and
like that era. Exactly. And it came out during that time. And I watched it and I remember thinking that was fine. It was kind of forgettable.
Yeah.
I'm imagining that the original was probably miles ahead of what it was. It's starring Dustin Hoffman, which I'm already excited about because The Graduate is one of my favorite movies.
That's actually one that's on my list I haven't seen yet.
Yeah,
I meant to watch it. Yeah,
it's so good.
I've heard great things for years.
So good.
I've heard great things for years about that one.
But Sam Peckinpah, we're going to talk about some Roman Polanski movies later.
Yeah, I saw two of them.
Yep.
Yep. Two of them were Roman Polanski.
Martin Scorsese. This is the era that gave us Mean Streets. Sure. Gave us Taxi Driver, Travis Bickle.
And then Network was a Sidney Lumet film who I've heard a lot about, but I think that actually might be my first film of his, and he is an amazing director. So it does make me want to see more of his films like quite a bit now.
Yep.
So
yep.
Because I've heard a great deal about him.
Coppola, Francis Ford Coppola, and the Godfather trilogy. Mainly 1 and 2, but the first time we've ever seen a family of gangsters depicted in such a way, especially with so much empathy. And Brian De Palma.
Dude, Scarface, come on. Carrie, Scarface, bro.
That chainsaw scene is out.
Dude, it's so good.
It's probably my favorite scene in the movie.
It is. It's crazy. Yeah. Like I almost kind of thought that when I saw American Psycho, I was like, you like Scarface. Like I was kind of thinking that. I was like, oh yeah. I love American Psycho, by the way. That's a great film.
It is a great film. I totally agree. I was actually watching, I've just been on a film interview kick. I was watching Christian Bale talk about his role in that movie.
I watch interviews a lot. I also love the Actors on Actors.
Actors on Actors is great.
Yeah.
But he was talking about his portrayal of Patrick Bateman and how he didn't try to portray him as an actual character. He just tried to portray him as a symbol of that yuppie era. Like, he didn't try to make him a real person. I thought that was really
Which I actually think is cool. If you think about it,
Yeah.
I could see that.
Yeah.
I could totally see that.
Yeah.
Actually, yeah. I
Mhm.
can see that now that you say that totally, yeah.
But let's talk about the book. We're talking about
Sure.
how much we love this era, and I don't know if anybody in Hollywood loves it as much, or at least expresses his love for it as much as Quentin Tarantino does through his body of work.
For sure.
And if anything, I know he's making 10 movies, and this was his 9th. This movie felt like a finale to me for his body of work.
I'm still holding out for Kill Bill Volume 3.
That's all I've ever wanted.
Like, or some like total horror film, even though I know he already did a slasher
With
in
Death
terms
Proof.
of Death Proof. I'd
Yeah.
love like a good like horror film too. Either.
Yeah. Before we start talking about the book, I kind of want to talk about the context of it because it was something that I found really interesting. Traditionally, when it comes to novels and film, this is a little backwards. A lot of times a studio will purchase the rights to a novel, get a director attached, and make a movie that way.
Yeah.
This isn't the case. Quentin Tarantino's, I think he's wrapping up his press tour for his release of this novel right now, and I've listened to him speak about it a lot. And the inspiration was during his youth when he would go to the movies. A lot of times afterward, there may be a paperback section in the bookstore or maybe at the theater where either the writer of the film or an author would see the movie and create a novelization of it. A lot of times it was attached to the studio.
You can find that a lot nowadays too. There's a lot of films that have like books that I don't even think they're written by the screenplay author, but like I think the studio might even hire someone to write the book version.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So reading it, it's not it wasn't the same story. It was the same story, but I suppose what I'm trying to say, it felt like not necessarily an expansion, but it felt like a companion piece to the movie, which I found really interesting. A lot of times, if we read a book first and we watch a movie, we're like, that is a condensed version.
Yeah.
For better or worse, that is
sure.
the condensed version of the larger story at play here. This didn't feel like that. This felt like additional information that would have made the movie potentially overly long, but still made for an entertaining book. I don't want to go too far into it, but I did want to put a little context in because I don't want to...
Please do, because I haven't read it yet either. So.
Well, yeah, I will, but I don't want to overspeak the questions you have for me too, because I'm sure we'll go into some of the stuff I want to say too.
Makes sense.
But with that, a quick review. I'll hold off, actually. Maybe I'll save that to the end. I don't want to jump the gun.
So the book is called Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, just like the film. And I assume that does it have the 2 leads from the film in it?
Sure does.
Okay.
Yeah, Rick Dalton, Cliff Booth lead the story. For anyone who doesn't know, it's a story of a actor who was a film star as well as had his own Western show, which was really traditional in the late 1950s and early 1960s. His career in Hollywood seems to be sunsetting, and he's dealing with a lot of emotions through that experience. Yeah. He's also accompanied by his stuntman, also his just kind of companion, his driver, his friend.
Brad Pitt, who's fantastic in that movie.
In a lot of ways, it's a slice of life movie about a different time. That era of Hollywood. And these 2 people tripping around that area. The Manson family gets involved. Film studios get involved. In Tarantino fashion, it can go completely to left field. It gets really crazy, but I think, compared to his previous films, this is one of his most subdued and kind of easygoing. Until
I was gonna say until my favorite last like 20 minutes. But like I would say that's kind of true. There are definitely some very Tarantino scenes, but it's a very chill film. Like there's no like snap of the pace. Like we have somewhere to be. It's very much like we're just going through these days with these people, and it's kind of nice. It's just a really chill, like vibing film. Like in a lot of ways. I mean, there's definitely some crazy shit, but like
there is
because it's Tarantino. But yeah,
exactly. I think the best visualization for the people who have seen the movie, that where I kind of put this into where his mindset is at compared to his previous body work, is there's a scene in the film and in the book where Cliff Booth, Brad Pitt's character, visits Spawn Ranch, which is currently housing the Charles Manson's family.
Yeah.
He gets to this ranch where Charles Manson and his family are living at the moment. And you get this classic Tarantino tension set piece where he pulls up. We know as the audience, these people are clearly dangerous. We watch him begin to uncover that throughout the scene. So we're, grasping our chairs. We think there's going to be some explosion of murder and blood and guts.
That was one of my favorite scenes in the movie because I was not sure what was going to happen.
Right. Now, and it keeps cranking and it keeps cranking. And if you've seen Tarantino movies, you know what this leads to. Mm-hmm. Something's going to explode. And in this movie, it never does.
It doesn't, yeah.
Well,
it does. Something explodes, but later.
Later. But I mean, in this scene.
You're right.
I don't know if that was kind of a intentional moment for his fans to be like, we're not doing that this time.
Yeah.
Till later.
Yeah. Yeah, you can wait.
But the book, it did follow the story beats of the film, but the story of the novel, in a lot of ways, it talks around the movie, which is kind of interesting. But I'm going to leave it to you. I know you have some questions for me, and
sure.
I'd love to talk more about this.
Okay, so let's start. I'm going to start with a question about Tarantino himself, because so you love like good authors. I mean, you actually, because like I do screenwriting and stuff, and I do like to read a lot of books. I felt like I used to read a lot more books than I do now. I listen to a lot of them on Audible, but in terms of physically reading them, I feel like lately I do a lot more films and television just because I don't have as much time, and like even that takes up a lot of time. So since you do a lot of reading and you actually love quite a few authors. Words are hard. What do you think of Tarantino as a book writer? Because like I know you've seen him as a screenwriter and a director. Yep. What do you think of him as an author in book form?
I think he's good. Something that I actually, before I answer that question, speaking of kind of how I got through this book that we were talking about earlier, that really, I hadn't done a book this way before. I've either kind of done either or with audiobook or reading it.
Yeah.
But to get through this, because I knew I had a deadline and I really wanted to finish it, I have an Audible subscription, so I was able to get it on a free credit, on Audible.
Me too. And by the way, we aren't sponsored by Audible, but both of us do have Audible because I think we both do think it's great.
We're not sponsored, but get it though.
Yeah, but it's awesome.
And then usually I'm very old school. I like hardcover and, paperback books, vinyl records, just like anything physical that I can hold. But in this case, I actually bought it on Kindle. And the reason I did that is because to get through it quickly, during my downtime at work, I would listen to the audiobook and it would update my place in my Kindle. And then I would read at night. And where I would leave off on my Kindle, it would update my audiobook for the next day. So I kind of went back and forth. And I'm kind of happy I did that because Jennifer Jason Leigh narrates the book. And she's phenomenal.
She is great.
It's awesome.
Yeah, I did hear the first, I think, 2 chapters. And she's great. When I found out she was reading it, I was super happy.
Yeah, I was too. And I would recommend this on audiobook. I think it's really easy listening and there's some really awesome scenes. It's just as great reading it physically. But I think this is a particularly great spoken performance.
And if you guys don't know, Jennifer Jason Leigh was like the villainess
Daisy Domergue.
Yeah, Daisy Domergue in Hateful Eight. Yeah, Tarantino's last film.
Yep.
Before Once Upon a Time in Hollywood.
Yeah. But to answer what I think of Quentin Tarantino as an author and as a screenwriter. So yeah, we all know him as a screenwriter. He writes his book not in screenwriting form, in novel form, but I noticed some of the language he uses is in that you would expect in a screenplay. Okay. Rick sips his water.
Yeah.
Something like that.
So he like describes scenes
sometimes
it's not like it's a screenplay.
Rick does this as he takes a drink. It's almost like he's describing the actions and then the dialogue and then the actions while there's dialogue. So it kind of feels like a screenwriter wrote it.
Okay.
Which is kind of cool. I really thought this was a cool first book. I don't think it was amazingly written. I don't think right now. I don't want to criticize a first-time author because he's incredible, and I'm not going to.
Is he a first-time author?
Well, for a novel.
Okay.
A first-time novelist.
Gotcha.
Because it's awesome. But I will say that due to the story, like we talked about, the movie's a hangout movie.
Yeah.
And it's a 2.5-hour hangout movie. Mm-hmm. This is a novel. And it's not a super long novel, but it's still a good 10 to 14 hours to get through.
Okay.
There's not a like a compelling drive that pushes the characters in the story forward. That's not happening. So I would say that if you don't love film history, and if you don't love the era, and if you can't get interested in the characters, the book might be a little hard for you.
Okay.
Because it's kind of just things are going on in a lot of ways. This person is experiencing this day. This person is experiencing this day. There's not any danger around the corner. You know what I mean?
Gotcha.
So that being said, if you are curious, I'll say if you've ever heard Quentin Tarantino talk about film, or you've ever heard him discuss the things he loves, and you like to hear him rant on these things because he's knowledgeable about all of these little pop culture references and specific films and trends of the time.
He also does a lot of historical research on a lot of his films.
He does. Yeah. He feels unleashed in this book. There are like in his story, he takes opportunities to ramble about things of the time, whether it be Sam Peckinpah, Roman Polanski, old westerns. He has an entire chapter depicting an episode of an old western called Lancer. You know,
that's awesome.
It is pretty awesome. It's awesome if you like that.
Yeah,
you know what I mean.
Yeah.
I like that. I had no problem. I couldn't wait to pick this book up when I was going to bed and pick it up the next day when my work was wrapping down.
Yeah.
So it really worked for me. I would say I read a lot of Stephen King, and Stephen King is also...
I'm also a Stephen King fan, so I feel you.
Okay, so you'll understand this. Stephen King very much is a writer of like his time, the 70s and the 80s, his references, and the way his language kind of goes on in his books. Quentin Tarantino is the same way. His language felt very 70s to me. The things he was talking, things are groovy, you know? For just as like a brief example. And that's how he speaks in real life too.
Yeah, it is. It is.
So he was really knowledgeable about the time, making it very easy to get immersed into the story and the characters.
Okay.
So I thought it was really good. Do I think his novels are as impressive as his movies? No. The guy makes just...
I think he's one of the best directors who's ever lived, so that's pretty hard.
Right. And that may come with time. But as a first go, highly recommend it. I really enjoyed it. I was impressed how it didn't follow the story beats to the film. It kind of talked around them and was a pretty large expansion of who the characters are and where they've come from that wasn't explored in the film.
Which means it's still worth a read if you haven't seen the movie then.
Yeah, and that's what I mean by it feels like a companion piece. It doesn't feel like a additional depiction. It feels like another good example. The ending of the film is discussed very early in the book, and the book ends on a completely different note on a conversation that doesn't happen in the film.
Interesting.
Right.
See, that's actually really cool though, because then you don't feel like you're just getting a repeat of what you've seen. You feel like you're essentially you saw a complete piece with the film, but it sounds like what you're getting is it's almost like the best analogy I can think of right now. So it sounds like it's almost like you're sitting down for a good dinner. There's all this amazing food.
Yeah.
Right? So you take all the pieces and make the perfect plate, and that's what's in front of you. But essentially, the film is there's more that you can grab and put on your plate.
I'll tell you this,
right?
For the people, this book is for the people who were curious what happened to Cliff's wife.
Oh.
For the people who are curious what more conversations between Rick's character and little Marabella on the film set
I love
would be like.
that.
It's for people who are curious how the hell Cliff could fight Bruce Lee. It's all of these things that you don't really think of when you're watching the movies. You just kind of accept it as what they are. And it adds all this additional context to why they are what they are. So it's almost, that's what I mean by it's a companion piece. It I don't even know if it improves the film in any way.
Interesting.
But
okay, that actually leads into my other other questions.
Yeah, but it is additional information around that.
Okay, so would you mind discussing a little bit more about some of the things that are in the book that aren't in the film?
Sure. Yeah.
Sure.
I can do that. I don't want to spoil it, but I mentioned this before.
Some small spoilers, just so you all know.
Okay. It goes into the history of Cliff Booth, how he got into the stunt industry, his life in World War II as a I don't remember his rank, but as a soldier in World War II and his accolades there.
Okay.
His time between coming home from the war, traveling internationally until he joined the stunt industry. It goes through a little bit more about Rick Dalton's feelings on where he's at in his career that leads him to the decisions he makes and the way he interacts with these film studios.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
It goes into a lot of information on what life was like for actors in the late 1950s. He calls it the Eisenhower era, where these actors who were coming out of that era used to being big stars with their pompadours and strong jaws, and all of a sudden they're not getting lead roles anymore. Now, shaggy-haired androgynous dudes are getting lead roles, you know, and their struggles with that, and they're having to adjust to a new culture that's changing around them.
Yeah.
Hair
it's kind of like pulling the rug out from underneath them, isn't it? Like, in a way.
Exactly. So it goes into the context of not only the fictional story there, but the real story of the actors and directors that were going on in this era and how they handled these things. They talk about hair a lot. And there's a scene in the book. This isn't really a spoiler, but it's explained that Rick Dalton has been wearing his pompadour for over a decade, and he's wondering why he's not getting leading roles. He doesn't want to change his hair. You know,
that's amazing, actually.
You know, so that's a good metaphor. So it goes into not only additional history and the context and feelings of what was going on before the film we see, but also the real life stories of Sam Peckinpah, Roman Polanski, how they rose to fame, what their film careers were like, what being an actor on a set of a 1950s and 60s Western was like, and what it was like to watch the world change around them to this new generation.
Okay. Interesting. That's actually really cool. Because I feel like a lot of what I've seen of Tarantino is he loves to write, and even actors will say what you see on screen, he has Bibles. Like he has deep backstories for every character. I mean, more and like what from what most actors have said in interviews, more than like other directors. Like, I mean, to the point where you could ask him an asinine question about the character, and he will genuinely think seriously about it.
Yeah.
And answer it for you based on like what he's written for them. So it sounds like this book actually allowed him to play to the fullest extent. Like, he actually got to give you these backstories. For once, he probably got to give you more of what he created for these characters than he can give you in the film.
Yeah. Also, it goes into a lot of his opinion. Well, not necessarily his opinions. He, as the author, maybe his opinions, but more so his characters' opinions.
Yeah, because he writes his characters honestly, even if he doesn't agree with them. He said that.
So he expands on what it was like to work with Bruce Lee at that time. He expands on what Charlie Manson was actually like and what his goals and intents were during that time. The way he would manipulate people to follow him. You know, all of these things that are kind of flirted with in the movie. Mm-hmm. But like you said, he has all of this information that he uses to make those decisions on how the characters act in the film. Mm-hmm. But he doesn't always give you that context. This book is like a pile of context.
See, so you're actually making me want to read it even more now, so that's good. Okay, so do you think that the book adds anything to the film experience? Like, do you feel like if you went back and watched the film now, knowing what you know about the book, do you think it would elevate the film, or vice versa? I'm going to combine these questions. Do you think there's anything from the book that knowing now actually takes away some things from the film?
I will say there's like that little, this comes from the same place of yes and no. I'm going to say yes by, this is kind of the snobby part of me that also feels a little bit entitled when I love a foreign film with subtitles. You know exactly what I'm talking about. And there's like, you should watch this. And the other person's like, it has subtitles. And you're like, I don't care. There's a little bit of that.
I prefer that too, because I want their real performance. I don't want like the dubbed performance.
When I watch this movie, I feel like I'm inside of the joke now. You know what I mean? Like when I watch this, I'll be like, he did that because of, you know?
Yeah, okay.
He did that because of this. This is why he's like that. I think that's the only way it expands the movie. Or improves the movie. I'm sorry about that.
Okay.
So in a way, not really, actually. I think it's a really cool additional piece, but I don't think it makes the movie much better. I think the movie's already great, in fact.
I like the movie too. Do you feel like there's anything that brings scenes down in the movie knowing more, or no? Or do you think no?
No, the only thing that I would wish is, you know, after reading this book, I think there's a 3 or 3.5 hour cut that could have been really cool as well.
That you kind of wish that you got?
Yeah, maybe a little bit. Because there were some scenes in this book where some things you read it and you're like, I don't need to hear about Cliff in World War II. You know, that doesn't need to be in this movie.
Yeah.
But I mentioned before, like, an additional conversation between Caleb Ducatu, who is, you know, Rick's like Western character, and Mirabella Lancer, that little girl, that happens in this movie. I'm like, or happens in the book. I'm like, I kind of wish that would have been in the movie. This is kind of awesome. You know what I mean? There are a few things like that where I'm like, I could have seen this as an additional scene. I could have seen this expanded upon. Doesn't make the movie better or worse, but it's almost like I want that director's cut.
I could see that. Yeah. And see, to me, that's a good place to be, though. Like, wanting more of something. Like right? I feel like that's a good thing.
You know what? Similar to how we talked about Lord of the Rings last episode, and you're like, the theatrical cut works great for me. This cut works great for me. Yeah. But also as a fan, I would love that extra half hour.
Yeah. You'd love to have the option to choose one that has more next time you watch it if you wanted to.
Exactly. That's what the book feels like. The book is more of a time investment, but this is that extra hour of material that's not in the movie that if you're interested in and loved it, here it is.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, it sounds like it was a really great book then.
Yeah, I really liked it. For
sure.
sure.
Cool. Yeah, I guess I'm going to have to get to that sooner on my Audible list then, because that does sound more interesting. And I also just love Tarantino, so I kind of feel like I would love to just hear him ramble about or his characters ramble about their backstories and stuff. So I think I'm down.
Yeah, I guarantee. I think you'll really love it. So with that, gets about 2 thumbs up from me, maybe 1.5. For people who are looking for that kind of driving force in the book. You know, this doesn't have that. But if you're okay with that, if you're okay with a hangout movie and a longer version of that experience that feels like a hangout book, you're gonna like it.
Sounds like if you're a fan of Tarantino style, you're gonna be in for the ride.
Yeah, for sure.
Okay, cool.
Awesome. So with that, we had a chance to watch some movies from this era as well to show some appreciation to the late 60s, early 70s.
Yes, I had a chance to watch 3 of them. So.
You had a chance to watch 3, 2 of which I've seen, one of which I haven't. We'll get into what they are. I had a chance to watch one that I hadn't seen because I was really focused on getting this book done as well as some other things.
Oh, for sure.
So the film I watched that I'm going to talk about is The Wild Bunch, directed by Sam Peckinpah. The movies you watched are
Network, directed by Sidney Lumet. I don't know if it's Lumet or Lumet, so I'm so forgive me if I mispronounce it. But then the other 2 are both Roman Polanski films. Chinatown, starring Jack Nicholson.
Yep.
And then we have Rosemary's Baby.
Oh yeah.
Yes, with Cassavetes and what's her name?
In Rosemary's Baby.
Yeah. I feel terrible now because I can't remember it right now, but. She was great in the movie.
It's on the tip of my tongue, and I'm embarrassed because I can't remember it either.
Yeah, I actually knew it literally 5 seconds ago, so forgive me.
It's Mia Farrow.
Mia Farrow, there we go. You got it.
Cool. So, why don't you kick it off?
Sure.
I've been rambling about this awesome book for a little bit. Which I suppose I want to ask you some questions around these movies.
Sure.
Out of the 3. I have seen Rosemary's Baby and Chinatown a couple times each. Also, before we get started, I'd like to share a fun fact about Roman Polanski. And I was talking to you about this earlier, and it was actually something that was talked about in Quentin Tarantino's book. But the history of him creating Rosemary's Baby.
Yes.
So Roman Polanski really hit it big in the European film market. He came out with this movie Repulsion, and a lot of times what thrillers were kind of viewed as when you think of like Hitchcock or any of the other kind of big horror directors or thriller directors of that day is they would build that tension within the audience, but they would always kind of have a release for it. And they would in a way have their characters experience fear or a grotesque act or something terrifying, but very rarely was as directed to the audience. Polanski was one of those directors that wanted to disgust the audience in a lot of ways. He did that with a movie Repulsion, which is a foreign film, I think a French film. And that was where he really kind of started his elevation. Came to America.
He's pretty great. I gotta be honest.
Yeah, his movies are something else.
Yeah.
But he came to make an American film. The not the producer, but the not the agent, but the film studio head or whoever brought him over, gave him the novel of Rosemary's Baby and said, "I think this would be great for you," which is incredibly inspired out the gate. Great job.
Yeah, for sure.
But he came back after reading the book and he said, it's an enjoyable book and I think there's a really good movie here. But Rosemary's Baby, the book, is told kind of as a straightforward monster story.
Yeah. And by the way, guys, we are going to be having some spoilers here. I mean, these are classics, so I feel like by now,
Right, exactly. But the way the book is told is it's very clear that there's a cult, souls have been sold, that baby is coming out as the Antichrist if this all goes on, and that's the tension. Roman Polanski didn't want to do it that way because he's an atheist. Yeah. And he said, I don't know if I'm comfortable or the right person to depict Christianity.
Yeah.
I'm not the right person.
And I can understand that. It's like you might want someone who believes in this stuff, who can really, maybe even really strike fear into people who really believe in this stuff. Like, sounds like he was doing his due diligence,
right.
Really. So.
Exactly. But the reason, and this goes along with this era of film where these filmmakers started to have more agency and ownership over the projects that they took on, he took it on, but he did it in a way where Rosemary's Baby, I'm excited to hear what you think about this movie, isn't told as a straightforward monster movie. In fact, everything that Mia Farrow's character goes through until the very, very kind of last few minutes can be viewed as a mental breakdown, loneliness, hysteria, any different thing. It's never handed to you.
A bit of isolation because her husband's working a lot.
A bit of isolation, and what she goes through in this movie and the way Mia Farrow plays it, it's so frustrating for her, because us as the audience in a lot of ways, I think we know better that there's something going on.
For sure.
And seeing her being gaslighted and treating this way is excruciating.
It's actually frustrating to me. Like I over time I was just like, you assholes.
Yeah, exactly. Really? But it's never given to you, the cult, the Satanists.
It's true.
It's never given to you till the end.
It's so true. Honestly, the ending of this film, I'm at, like, now that I've seen it, I'm like, Ari Aster liked this movie. Hereditary. I was like,
exactly. Yeah. But he depicted it that way because he's an atheist. He didn't want it to be a Christian demon monster movie. He wanted it to be something that had a little more plausibility until the end.
He wanted you to wonder if maybe she was just kind of losing it. Like, to some extent.
And that was the time he was able to do that during this era film. But what did you think of Rosemary's Baby?
I loved it, and because, like you, I pay close attention to things in film. Like I knew that part of the ending, like when they first found the apartment and the bookcase was shoved up against the closet, I'm like, clearly something was. Yeah. She was keeping something out of the closet or someone. Yeah. So I was like wondering when that was going to come back into play, and then of course I immediately caught on about her husband when the competition went blind. And I was like, and they invited the husband over the second night for drinks, and he told her, you could stay here if you want. And I was like, oh no. Like, because I only knew Rosemary's Baby, like I assumed it was like a demonic pregnancy or something, right? Yeah. Did not know the cult aspect. But the moment, like, they met the girl who lived with them with the locket, and then she turns up dead, and then they give her one, and these people are just so... I found them so irritating. Like they're so irritating. Intrusive. They're so like they basically like guilt her into letting them in the first time. It's this old couple, and they seem like they're being nice, but they're really pushy and getting involved in their lives, and especially the wife. She's asking a lot of questions, like super nosy, and you're like, I don't like these people, first of all. But then when they give her the locket too, and I was just like, I don't know. And then there's like just a few scenes later, there's like this weird chanting that they hear in the evening. And I was like, oh no. I was like, don't let those people into your house anymore. Like, just don't. But also, this is also me watching it now from a modern day, right? And I'm like, no, this is very bad. I was like, I know where this is going. Like, I was like immediately like, no. Yeah. But her performance is fantastic. And she inspires so much sympathy throughout this film because she's really alone in this. And Like I almost felt happy for her when she has the moment where she actually is able to invite her friends over and have a party. Yeah. And I love how for the first time they're like, you shouldn't be in pain for 7 months of a pregnancy. And you know, I feel like it's the first moment where she gets some validation,
Yeah.
and it gives her the confidence to start saying things like, "I think I want to see another doctor. Like I want to." And of course and then of course it's bad because the husband's asking questions about where she's going to meet people and stuff, and you're like, "No, I no longer trust him. I know what's happening." It just gets worse and worse, and then by the end, you know, and the scene where she gets impregnated is just like, oh God, that's like that. I could see
terrible.
I could see especially that back then being so terrifying to people.
Yeah.
Because it's really disturbing, and the fact that she sees everyone, and you know they play it off as like she's having a dream while she's essentially getting raped. Basically, is what's happening. It's pretty awful. And then in the morning, you know, of course he's acting like he has no idea what she's talking about, and it's like, okay, but yeah, but I feel like there are things he also adds in that makes you think that she could already have a fragile mind, because he kind of starts with these flashes like before it gets kind of crazy. Like she has her first kind of like almost like dream, or there's like a little dream flash, and you're kind of like, what was that about?
Yeah.
But it kind of does lead you to think maybe she's disturbed, or maybe she has some kind of trauma she's suppressing, and then throughout the film you kind of realize there's not really any indication, nothing ever comes up about her having some trauma or anything. So the flashes, it's almost like, I feel like it's almost like there is an indication that it could be psychological, but if you're paying close attention, it seems like he's telling you something's up, you know, like to some extent, you know. And I just felt like the isolation of him, you know, working more, and of course things are going really well now, and I'm like, that's suspicious. And then, but she's so alone, and it's really awful in a way, because she's left alone. If you really think about it, by the end of the film, she is left alone with all of the people that are damning her, like the entire film. Yeah. Like even with something like Hereditary, it's one person essentially who's kind of gets involved and slowly screws up the family, and it leads to all these awful things. Like essentially the one lady kind of does, and then there are
film. Like
in the film,
there's more people in the background.
Yeah, there's more people in the background, but she's like the frontal face that starts the kind of, you know. But like in this film, literally, Rosemary, everyone around her, who is isolating her from the world, is part of this awful
Satanist cult.
Yeah. And the moment she gets any friends that come to visit her, something terrible happens to them, and it's just like, I just feel so bad for her, because she is just alone. Like she is so alone this entire film. Even the one person who should be on her side, which I kind of thought the whole movie was going to be her trying to convince her husband something was going on, and he doesn't believe her.
That's
the fact that, you know, that's the traditional archetype, and it's like the fact that he turns on his own wife for his own selfishness at the beginning of the film. Like he's an asshole at the beginning of the film. It's not even like he slowly gets corrupted. It's like whatever they showed him off screen, he believed them and was like, I don't need to ask Rosemary about this or anything. Like, I want what I want.
My baby.
Yeah. Well, like seriously, like the fact that she was left alone from the beginning of this film, it's one of those films where I just feel so sorry for her by the end of the film. And I also love the introduction with the kind of creepy hum lullaby and how it ends with that as well. I really like that quite a bit.
What I mentioned Roman Polanski, you know, trying to discuss the audience. Yeah. And in this movie, what's difficult is, you know, some of the best horror movies tend to be, usually they're around some sort of family dynamic that is troublesome before the supernatural stuff gets involved.
Exactly.
And this is an entire movie about a woman being abused by everybody
100%.
around her. And it's not an easy watch. And even for a 1970s movie where you hear somebody say it's not an easy watch, this movie's really uncomfortable.
It's really uncomfortable. Yeah, especially since I am from a modern era, so I'm now watching something older, and I know that it's influenced other things. Yeah. So the moment I see things, I feel like I know where it's going, and I was right, but it makes it even more uncomfortable for me, because there's none of what I was expecting to happen in terms of her having to convince her husband or the family that she's literally just alone. It's like you said, she's left with abusers like the entire film, and she knows something's wrong, but she also doesn't want to cause a problem and act like she's just being it almost is like the way the elderly couple keeps seeming like they're doing nice things for her. Yeah. And even the doctor makes it seem like they're on your side. So she actually, the worst part about it is she's manipulated into feeling like she is being a burden if she's not grateful. Like, which is just, it's awful. It really, really is. Like, it's a very good movie though. Like it's, Yeah, it's and it totally follows this new wave thing where it's just kind of fucked up, like the whole
Yeah,
thing.
it is.
And by the end, and I was literally like, oh, I know this ending. Like, and then when they were like, the baby died, I'm like, no, it didn't.
Yeah,
like,
exactly.
and I was like, so is she not gonna find out? Is it gonna
Yeah.
like, you know, pan out of the bed and then pan into the other room and just show you? But no, she flat out finds it. And then the worst part is she kind of ends up succumbing at the end of the film,
Yeah.
like out of. Like, it's to me, that film is like a horror. It's like a Stockholm syndrome tragedy. Is
Yes.
basically what it
That's
ends
a
up
great way
feeling
to
like.
put
By
it.
the way,
It is like a
it's like a
Stockholm
demonic
syndrome
Stockholm
tragedy.
syndrome. By the end of that film is what it seems like, and
Yeah.
it's just tragic. Like, as the viewer, I'm just like, that is so sad. Like, it really is. And then you realize the humming that's happening at the beginning of the film was her humming at the end of the film. It's like.
And you're right. I don't know if I ever mentioned it, but when I watched Hereditary, which is my favorite modern horror movie, and when I watched Midsommar, I was like,
He really likes.
I was like, these are both Rosemary's Baby.
Yeah,
Like,
yeah.
these
I
are
was
both
like,
very much
he likes Roman
You know, I'm
Polanski,
like,
Rosemary's
these
Baby.
are as much Rosemary's Baby as the Joker's Taxi Driver. Like, we're just
Yeah,
remaking
it is.
films from the
Sorry,
70s.
Taxi Driver and The King of Comedy.
And
Like,
The King of
it's like the
Comedy.
mixture
Yeah,
of both. Yeah,
But
for sure.
I am watching a lot of movies today, and I'm like, so we're remaking 70s movies and just putting a little more 2020 into it?
Yeah,
You know?
it's been happening more and more lately.
But
for
that
sure.
being said, these movies that I'm mentioning, they're all great.
They
They're
are.
all really good.
I love Hereditary.
Me too.
And I love Midsommar.
Same. And I love the
Sorry,
Joker.
Midsommar.
I love the Joker. Joaquin Phoenix
Oh, I
is my
love the
favorite
Joker.
actor. Well, favorite living actor right
Oh,
now.
dude, the entire sequence on the show and Joker is just
It's the bomb.
That tension is just
It's
so
the bomb.
good.
Yeah. I'm happy you liked it. I want to end on Chinatown. I haven't
Sure.
seen Network.
Yeah.
So I'm gonna let you take this one away.
So Network is really interesting. Network was a film that some of my friends that know the kind of stuff that I write and like my writing, they also know some of the shows that I love and movies. I've had 3 or 4 different people over the last, let's say, 5 years recommend Network to me. And 3 of the 4 people don't even know each other. So these were independent decisions to recommend this movie specifically to me, under the assumption that they're fairly certain I would like it. Like, it would be right up my alley. So it's been on my list for a while. That's why when it was part of this era, I was like, okay, now I have no excuse. This was like my number one that I had to watch because I've needed to watch it for a long time. So the best way to describe it is it's almost like a dark satire that does have some dark, very dark comedic elements to it. But it's like a dark satirical look at the news industry, which I imagine that's the only thing I regret about this podcast is I wanted to do some research on this and I didn't get a chance to. Totally forgot. But I wanted to do some research on the film industry around the time this came out because I have a feeling it's mimicking some things that actually happened. Because, like, for instance, some things that happened in this film were, there wasn't a lot of independent news anymore. Like, people were selling out to the corporation to where the corporation now made news basically that also pleased sponsors, right? So like,
when was it made?
yeah.
Anytime, ever.
Yeah, exactly, right? So what I like about the film is I made sure not to look up anything about what it's about.
Yeah.
So it just starts and there is a news broadcaster and there's like there's an introduction, like a slight narration. And basically, it basically lets you know that this man has been told that, he's been on the air for 30 years. He looks like he might be in his 60s or something. He's had a long career as like a news anchor, right? Yeah. He has his own, night show where he does the news for a network. I think the network is called UBS in the movie. I'm assuming that's made up because, I don't think there's UBS. And basically, ratings have been falling. They're in this. It's all about ratings, right? So ratings have fallen. And he's kind of being kicked to the curb. So he's basically being given like a 2 weeks notice that, in 2 weeks, we're going to be taking you off the air. You had a good run, blah, blah, blah. This really, really upsets him. So it kind of starts with his first news broadcast. He doesn't read the scroll that they give him. He basically says out loud, so I'm basically being canned. And this is the beginning of my last 2 weeks here. And on my last night here, I'm going to kill myself. I'm going to commit suicide on camera. And they're like, shit! Like and you don't swear on the news or anything. So like, even just saying you're going to commit suicide. Like all these calls come in. It's like a huge problem. The movie just starts with this, and you're just like, oh snap! Like what's going on, right? So and the guy who's his boss, who runs this news division, is his friend. Clearly, they've worked together for years. And the fact that he's threatened suicide, so he's like, okay, I'm going to take him back to my place. We're going to talk to him about this. And of course, they're like, well, he's just fired. He can't go back on the air, now, blah, 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 blah.
Right.
Faye Dunaway is a great character who's been, I'm assuming she's been brought in for another network where she did great things. And she's essentially to me, I was telling you, she reminds me of Renee Russo's character in Nightcrawler. Like she's like the head, and she's responsible for getting this network's numbers up and getting us back to that #1 spot. Right.
Yeah.
And there's, and with this news organization, there is no, what's the word I'm looking for? There are no rules. There's no empathy. There's no ethics at all. Like she doesn't even care how she gets the network back.
As long as it's #1.
Exactly. As long as it's #1. And the people above her, for the most part, seem to agree. Okay. As you can imagine, the guy's friend who's his boss doesn't, because he cares about his friend's mental health. Right. So they managed to convince him. But see, for her, she talked to the head, and she's like, no, bring him back on. Because he said that, the numbers went up like an insane amount in one freaking night. Right? Okay. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, no, I'm on board.
Yeah, you're getting where this is going.
I'm on board.
So she has him bring it back on, and they're like, fine, you can still, do this out the rest of your week, but you need to get on, apologize, blah, 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 blah.
Yeah.
So he gets on the next night, and he's like, he ignores the prompt again.
Yeah.
And he just starts talking. He's like, they want me to come on and apologize. I said I was going to commit suicide at the last day. It's true. I should never have said that. I am sorry. I'm just tired of all the bullshit. And he says, and now no one swore on TV back then. So, or at least not in the news, right? So when he said that, the phones went crazy, right? He's like, I'm tired of the bullshit. Now, what's interesting about this is his friend, who's his boss, would never have allowed that. But there was a huge function the night before where they announced that now they're basically going to be owned by their wholly subsidiaries and their affiliates, right? Yeah. The news organization is basically really owned by the company, and the company answers to the sponsors, blah, blah. And he wasn't told about this. Yeah. So he's upset. So when he says bullshit, they're like, oh, pull him off. He goes, no, let him finish.
We're getting something here.
So what I love about it is he proceeds to go on this rant about the news and how much bullshit it is. And the crazy thing is he is losing his mind, kind of, unfortunately, but he's telling you the truth that people will not tell you. So it's kind of brilliant because people love it. They're like, wow, he's speaking his mind, and he's telling you things that you're not supposed to know, which pisses people off. But Faye Dunaway is like at the end of this night, she's like, our numbers doubled again. Like she's just like
Juice.
Whatever. And the crazy thing is he is having mental trouble. So she is willing to abuse him. Yeah. Even at the risk of him ending up totally going insane on the show for ratings. Now, she's not his boss. The guy is. After the second episode, though, there's this whole thing where they want to give him his own show now and just let him say whatever he wants. That's the thing. This reminds me of, it has aspects of like what I loved about Nightcrawler, but also one of my favorite shows ever, the first season especially, The Newsroom on HBO. I think the first season of The Newsroom, Jeff Daniels, written by Aaron Sorkin, I think it is one of the, if you want the truth, I think the first season, the whole seasons 2 and 3 are good. I love them. Yeah. But season 1 is a 10 out of 10. Like to me, season 1, even if it was just a miniseries, is one of the perfectly written, directed, performed anything ever made. Like the first season is so brilliantly written, and it's actually bookended from the opening scene to the end. And I'm not going to tell you how if you haven't seen it. It's on HBO. Watch it. It's awesome. Yeah. But that first season, So, and he does something very interesting with it, because you have to imagine this came out like a year or two after events. So he uses the knowledge of past events to report things as if, what if we reported them the way we should report them, right? Like honest reporting. Like that was essentially the whole basis of Newsroom. So in a way, I feel like that idea came from this movie. Like someone who doesn't give a shit. So they're going on air telling you everything about the industry.
The whole industry.
There are even sections where he goes on rants and tells you the truth about how like so many of these companies, if you look into them, they're not even owned by Americans anymore. They're owned by Arabic oil companies who've like bought into these. And now they're our corporate sponsors. They're the overlords that you have to please and all these things. And he's telling you about like how the price of oil affects things and how, and they're all very true. Like even back then. So like, so essentially what the film is about is it's about like someone kind of telling you the truth about the industry through a film about the industry, which is really interesting. And I call it like almost satirical because no one would ever allow this to happen in real life.
Yeah.
You know, it's like a mockery of the film industry by, you know what it reminds me of? It reminds me of like if it was like the first ever Black Mirror episode, but like about a news network, about the news, like what the news really is,
the way
right?
we receive information on what's going on in the world.
It reminds me of like a Black Mirror episode where the mirror is turned on the news organizations, the information that is given to us as a society. And by the end of the film, it's like he's literally talking about how, you know, stop, you know, they tell you to jump, you jump. Like that's literally what it is. A lot of you don't even finish reading the paper. You only know what you know on my network. You don't verify anything. You don't. And that's the truth today. Like even the internet technically is able to spread so much misinformation along with real information. And the problem is the average person sometimes can't decipher which is which. So they end up reading the wrong thing or sharing the wrong thing or, you know, and because a lot of it comes down to having to do the due diligence to actually look into it and verify it. And most people don't want to spend that kind of time. So it's like the crazy thing is this was so ahead of its time that seeing the world now, like it called it back then, it almost even predicts where it's going to go. Because back then people were first starting to get addicted to technology and the only technology was the TV.
Right.
So it's about getting addicted to the TV. And Faye Dunaway's character, because she's kind of a monster, she only cares about ratings. So she's willing to like ruin this guy's mental health for ratings, right? So I don't really want to spoil the ending, but what I'll just say is it comes to a point where there are characters that speak truth to people, not just about the news, but about their values, which I think is a really important conversation to have even nowadays. So Network was awesome. You guys need to watch it. It's really, really good. It's very well directed. It's exceptionally well directed. Like it seems simple, but if you really pay attention to some of the scenes and the way they're crafted, he really focuses on character. He really focuses on scene. And Faye Dunaway is fantastic in the movie. She's awful.
She's a star.
She's
awful.
Incredible. She's an awful person, but she is fantastic in that movie.
Yeah.
And honestly, one of my favorite parts of the movie is the network head. One of the network heads, who's his boss that I told you about, ends up literally leaving his wife to date this younger Faye Dunaway and everything. And he knows it's wrong. And he feels terrible about leaving his wife and all this stuff. But at the end of the film, he leaves her because she's so obsessed with her job that the whole time they're talking, she's only talking about work and she only cares about the ratings. And he's an afterthought. And she was like that. And he knew this when he started dating her, right?
Yeah.
But when he gets up and leaves her, the it's not even a dialogue because she's more silent, but his lecture to her is a wonderful thing. Like I will just say it is a wonderful thing. And I know people who have the same problem in their areas of work or interest. And it is a wonderful thing. Like I understand why this movie, and at the time this movie probably was very risky because some of the stuff they do is insulting the very industry that so it's like
there's a trend in this
it's area almost like it
movies being risky.
It's so weird, but I would definitely recommend it. And I'm like 100% sure that I'm like 100% sure that you will love it. Like,
I'm 100% sure I'll love it.
You've
already
really
said enough.
It's really good.
Not that I don't want to hear more.
Like I loved all three films that I watched, but it was my favorite one.
Yeah. Awesome. Okay. I'm going to talk about the one movie that I had a chance to watch that I hadn't seen.
Because I have not seen this one.
So I decided to watch The Wild Bunch by Sam Peckinpah. Fortunately for me, I've seen a lot of Westerns in this era. I've seen The Man with No Name trilogy. Yeah. I've seen Once Upon a Time in the West. I've seen all the Sergio Leone Westerns, you know.
I've actually only seen one of the Man with No Name movies and the big one.
They're all great.
Yeah.
They're all great. You know, I watched The Wild Bunch directed by Sam Peckinpah and it blew me away. It's not one of my favorite movies of all time, but seeing the influence on not only understanding what influenced American Westerns to get to this film, which also, like all the other movies we talked about, incredibly risky for its time, but also seeing the way that this movie has kind of reverberated through the Western genre in pretty much any of the mediums that I enjoy, films, novels, games. Once I start talking about this movie, you're going to know exactly what game it sounds like. I'm going to kind of break down what this film is about.
Okay.
A ruthless gang of robbers and killers and bastards and no good dirty sons of bitches are in the Old West They're fighting for their survival as modernization and the Old West changes around them and leaves them as a relic of the past. Mm-hmm. Is there a game that's like that in this last couple of years?
Yeah.
It's very Red Dead Redemption 2.
Very much.
That being said, in fact, the gang is led by William Holden and his right-hand man, whose name also happens to be Dutch.
And William Holden is also in Network, I believe.
Yeah. William Holden plays a character named Pike. His right-hand man, played by Ergus Borgnine, plays a character named Dutch. And they are on the run from a group of bounty hunters. And this bounty hunter, the lead bounty hunter who's after them, his name is Thornton. And the reason he's after them is that he used to run with this gang. But during, after a heist, when the police were after them, he was shot and Pike ran away. He escaped and this person was brought to hang. Instead of hanging, he's given a chance by pretty much a railroad tycoon to track down his old gang, kill them or bring them to justice, or he can hang himself. That being said, he doesn't give him good men to do this. He gives them scummy pieces of shit that don't know how to hold a gun straight. So he has a lot of frustrations around that. But you follow this band of killers as they do their best to escape after a robbery gone wrong. The movie starts with a robbery scene, and immediately it shows the group in army attire marching through this town as they are getting ready to infiltrate a bank to rob it and make away with the cash. What they don't know is that this is all a setup. The money in the bank has been replaced with silver washers, and Thornton and his crew are ready for an ambush.
Oh my god.
Right? So you're going through... And
what's the perspective? Like, do you know this, or do you find this out as
the audience knows.
Okay,
so we are very aware that there are 15 men with rifles on top of these buildings, and we're watching this group of characters march through this town getting ready to rob this bank, and you're just biting your nails.
Oh no.
On top of that, this movie depicted violence like no other Western before it. And the movie kicks off in a really interesting way. As you're traveling through this town, a lot of time and camera work is spent on the children of this town, and specifically one group of kids who are playing on an anthill. And on an anthill, there's a scorpion in the middle of the anthill, and the ants are crawling over it, biting it, getting ready to rip it apart, and the kids are poking it with sticks, and they all have gleeful looks on their faces. And as they're playing with it, you get these stills where it'll go still black and white and freeze frame for about 5 seconds on different images, and you're watching the children gleefully kind of watch this insect get torn apart.
Yeah.
And it's immediately uncomfortable.
Yeah.
So you go in, and I mentioned William Holden being one of those.
And this is like as they're coming into town. Oh, that's psychologically just...
It's awesome.
That's great.
I talked a little bit earlier about William Holden being kind of that good guy, post-World War II movie guy, all of a sudden walking into a bank. If he moves, kill him. It's immediately out the gate like, these guys are awful.
Yeah.
I kind of want them to die.
Yeah.
But, it goes as you expect. The robbery leads to this huge shootout. Everyone in the town is scrambling. Men, women, or children are getting shot by stray bullets left and right. People are trying to escape. You don't know who's going to survive. And after this, the group that we've come to know that just robbed the bank is on the run. Their intent is to get to Mexico and hopefully escape this Old West before it catches up with them. Mm-hmm. Within Mexico, they come across this general that is doing his best to lead a revolution against the current government, but he doesn't have the weaponry that he needs to give to his men so he can support this revolution. And the group comes into town, and one of their group has ties to the local villages of this town.
Okay.
And they're like, look, we can help this general get these guns. We know how to commit robberies. There's going to be a military train coming through with a whole lot of guns. We can get that to this general. We can make some money. This will be our last job, and we can ride off our separate ways or ride off into the sunset, and we can survive this. What you come to understand through the movie is if these people are bad, this general is the worst. He's murdering, he's pillaging, he's raping, he's destroying these areas. And like I mentioned...
Sorry, guys, dog.
Yeah, dogs. Bye, Rose. Like I mentioned, one of the local crew has ties to this area. He grew up there. He is not okay with this general having the weaponry to destroy his people. So he says that he will do this job with this group only if he's able to take one of these gun cases to supply them to the village. You know, they say, you got yourself a deal. There's 16. We'll make a deal for 15. The general gets his weapons. We get to keep you. You know, we have to stick together. There's strength in numbers. We want you with us. Great. Goes through an incredible train robbery sequence that leads to a chase. That leads to a explosion across a bridge as they get into Mexico, as they're pursued by the bounty hunters that deduced that they were going to rob this train and that were waiting for them and had the military with them, waiting for that moment. Oh my God. Incredible set pieces. It's fucking awesome. And it gets to the point where it goes off without a hitch. They set up, they know this general's sadistic, so they set up a plan to be able to bring the general. They hide the cases in separate areas and they ride into the general's town one at a time, and he pays them bit by bit. And every time he gives them a bag of gold, they say, okay, thank you for that. There's 2 cases 2 miles that way over that hill. The general goes and gets the guns. The next cowboy rides into town, gives him the money, says there is, 2 cases. They're very careful about it.
Sure.
You get through that. They're about to get their gold. They ride into town, the last group of people. One of them is one of the people that grew up in Mexico in the village. And he says, hey, thank you so much. But unfortunately, there's a liar amongst you. So I know one of you stole my guns. So,
oh man,
it's a lose-lose situation.
Yeah.
The people he's with said, well, you take him, that's what it is. Can't trust a liar. He's yours now. Through that, so now they have the general on one side. They just took their friend. The bounty hunters are closing in from the United States, coming into Mexico. They're between a rock and a hard place.
So the ending is just essentially this giant clusterfuck.
Well, you would think so.
Okay.
Yes, but going on with that, they make a decision. They say, we can leave with what we have and leave him. But once they see what the general's doing, they're essentially... The general has one of the first automobiles that he's really excited about. And they're celebrating the potential victory that they could have with their revolution due to all of these new arms that they now possess. And with this liar, they're dragging him through the town with his feet tied to the back of the car. Just through the gravel, through the dirt. And they see it and they say, we need to buy him back. The general won't give him to him. He's having fun torturing him. So essentially what it leads to is, with the bounty hunters closing in, they are seeking refuge in the general's kind of small town to hide from the bounty hunters that are closing in, because the group just brought him all these guns. He has no issues with them. He has an issue with the liar. But at the end, they make a decision that they can't leave their friend behind. And the 5 of them, they arm up, they get a whole bunch of weapons, and it just leads into absolute chaos towards the end of this movie. And it's just an absolute bloodbath. And it was shocking to me, who you watch the movie and you're like, yeah, this movie's pretty bloody. This movie's pretty violent. There's definitely not any kind of Western I've seen that feels this violent before. And then you get to that final kind of 20 minutes and you are like, God damn, this is... People's chests are exploding out of their back. People are getting shot 16 times, screaming. There are scenes where it's 120 frames per second in slow motion of just big blood explosions.
Oh man, that sounds awesome.
This small group takes on this general small Mexican army. And I'm not going to spoil who makes it, who doesn't make it, anything like that. But similar, you see these like kind-faced stars that we're familiar with blowing people's chests out with shotguns. This movie was risky. And this era, this was what I would imagine is the beginning of theater walkouts.
It's yeah,
you
probably. I can imagine people that are used to the vanilla happy musicals just shocked at what's happening on screen, like 100%.
Yeah, absolutely. And this was the movie that created that genre of this group. It's a very Western trope. This group of old outlaws that time is leaving behind.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? They don't have, the world doesn't have space for them.
So it's almost like they have nothing to lose, though.
That's exactly right.
Which is what makes them more dangerous in a lot of ways, right?
Yeah, the world doesn't want them anymore.
You basically said, fuck us, so I got nothing to lose,
and
bro.
You know, rightfully so, because we don't want people robbing our trains,
Exactly.
even if they don't shoot the person they're robbing.
Yeah, exactly.
You know? But it was a way of life, and it was a way of life that they could get away with up until this point.
And that's something I've always said, that like you can write a monster, you can write anything, but you know what one of the most terrifying things is?
Mosquitoes.
Well, malaria is pretty bad. But one of the most terrifying things, in my opinion, is a person who wants you dead or wants to cause you pain and is not afraid of accepting the consequences after they do so. Someone that is not afraid of, they're fine with going to jail. They don't care.
Yeah.
But they want you. Like that is scary. There's something scary about that someone is after you. They want to cause you pain, and they're not going to stop until they do. And it's like the line from Terminator. There's no bargaining with them. There's no reasoning with them. They don't feel pity or remorse or fear. You know, like he labeled it really well, because they don't care about the consequences, because all they want is you. Like, and that's something about that is terrifying, especially if there's someone that has already proven to be dangerous or terrifying or to have an awful reputation. Like, sometimes that's scarier than any monster, you know, because at least the monster's just doing what it does. Maybe it just eats people. It just eats you or whatever. Yeah. But this is like someone that's after you, or, you know, for one, you know, like there's something scary about that. So I feel like the idea of the fact that you're right, like they don't deserve to be thought of, right? But to them, they have nothing to lose now. Exactly. But they have like this life of experience.
Of doing what they know how to do.
If they're going to cause problems, they're really going to cause problems.
Yeah, and they cause a lot of problems in this movie. One of my favorite parts is the experience of the lead bounty hunter who used to be in the gang, because the way he's treated and the way he's kind of experiencing the story on the right side of the law, you know?
Yeah.
He can't stand it. And he's seeing the people he's chasing like, what a fucking thrill. You know, like that was the time to be alive.
That's awesome.
Yeah, so
I definitely need to watch this. This is the Wild Bunch.
This is the Wild Bunch, yeah. So it's one of those anti-hero stories where the lead characters you follow are the worst. They're terrible, but then the villains are so much worse than them.
Yeah.
You know?
You're like, these guys are bad, and then you meet them and you're like, oh, come on. This is like the worst world ever.
Yeah,
like,
exactly. So I loved it. Super high recommendation, especially if you're a fan of Westerns and gritty, brutal, violent Westerns, then this will be up your alley, and it holds up really well today too. The direction, the writing, the acting, it's all top notch.
Oh, I bet. Yeah, I just realized I technically did see a couple more new Hollywood films than I thought, because I forgot about The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, and then I also saw.
But that's more spaghetti. It wasn't in Hollywood.
Yeah,
it still kicked off the trends.
But it was still imported over. Like, yeah, I mean, it's still that era though, right? Like, is it still part of the It's the Fistful of Dollars, right? Like.
Yeah, so it is. It is part of the era. It's the right time frame. Kurosawa, Leone. But I suppose it wasn't made in Hollywood. Those movies kind of led to New Hollywood. Yeah, you know? that's fair. They were like the ones that were being shown over. Because I loved Once Upon a Time in the West. That's probably my favorite. That's probably my favorite Sergio Leone film. Like hands down, like it is my favorite one. That's another movie where you're used to seeing Henry Fonda as a hero.
Yeah.
And that movie starts with him killing a child.
Exactly.
And you're like, what?
Yeah, and I love even like just the scene on the train dog, the train dog. Yeah, it was just great. Like, it's so great.
You gotta be patient for that scene.
So patient, and I'm fine with it. I was in it. I was like, man, I just love this. Like, he's taking his time with this kind of introduction, right? Which it worked out too. And I also love the kind of like, what was it? The harmonica or the flute sound whenever the guy was around. Yep. It was almost like he created his own Michael Myers song, you know, or something. It was awesome. So cool. Like,
super cool.
Yeah.
That leaves us to one more.
Yeah.
So I actually intentionally didn't nerd out this entire podcast on Jack Nicholson movies from the 60s and 70s.
I know you love Jack. I love Jack Nicholson too.
I am a huge Jack Nicholson fan.
I am too.
And Chinatown's one of them.
He's one of my favorite actors of all time. Him and Anthony Hopkins are two of my faves ever.
Yeah. I could have gone off. I didn't think to do it, and we don't have time now. But I could have ranted and raved about One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest.
I've seen that one too, actually. So that's a very good movie. But Danny DeVito was in there too. Yeah.
Danny DeVito was in it.
I think it's the only time I've ever seen him, a smaller guy.
Brad Dourif's in it.
Is he?
Christopher Lee in it? Christopher
I
Lee's
think Christopher Lee's in it. Yeah.
Yeah, there's a lot of killer actors in that movie.
Yeah, but Chinatown was very good.
Another Polanski.
Yeah, another Polanski one. Yeah, his directing is really great. I love the angles. Like in that film, he utilized like anytime they were in a car, like everything was from inside the car, like the entire time. Essentially, if we're gonna well, like I don't want to take too much of your time, but like essentially it's about Jack Nicholson plays a private investigator with his team, right?
Yep.
And he's hired by a woman who says that she's the wife of this guy who's one of the heads of the water department, and she's convinced that he's cheating on her, right?
Yep.
So he follows him around, blah, 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 gets some pictures of him meeting some woman on a boat, blah, blah, blah. And then, you know, somehow it gets leaked to the press and they find out about it, but then Faye Dunaway shows up, and it turns out she's actually the guy's wife. So we have no idea who this woman was who claimed to be his wife and hired him in the first place. But it just basically, it's like getting egg on his face. Like suddenly, for one thing, it shows up in the media, but then he got duped by someone, which doesn't happen to him. So he's now not going to let this go, right? But he also noticed the guy did wander a few different places, did some kind of odd things, talked with a couple of odd people, seemingly out in the middle of nowhere. And then the guy turns up dead. The husband turns up dead. So it's this huge mystery, basically. It becomes the cops are investigating the murder. He's investigating the murder because he knows it'll lead to whoever this person was, and someone clearly hired her to pretend to be this guy's wife. So, of course, Faye Dunaway is a suspect. She has to be, right? Yeah. And then other people, of course, the person who took over his job at the water department's a suspect. You know, through his investigation, he kind of meets a few people that tell him to stop poking around.
Roman Polanski is one of those people who gives him the neck on the nose.
Is that really him? Is that Roman Polanski? Yeah. I did not know that. Yeah. That's awesome.
Yeah.
But it basically leads to this huge story where he starts to realize it's bigger than he thought it was, right? And he kind of got, unfortunately, dragged in the middle of it, and his decision to not let it go now put him in a much worse situation. And now he kind of just has to get to the bottom of it because people clearly know who he is, right? Yeah. So, but basically, the twist of the ending essentially was. There's a, I guess I don't want to spoil. Let's just say the twist of the ending was there is a very, very awful truth that comes into play with that is connected to the person who's responsible for the whole thing. And what's interesting about the film to me is it's really well filmed. It's really interesting. It's this nice, it's a nice, investigative kind of, not really, it doesn't even feel like a thriller. It's just like an investigation.
It's like a film noir.
Film noir, mystery film. Yeah, it's a noir for sure.
Yeah.
But by the end, what's crazy about it, I won't tell you what happens, but I will tell you that the ending is not at all what you expect. Like, everything's kind of coming together. There's like the moment of truth, and you expect it to go one way, and the ending ends up going so wrong that I was actually jaw dropped. Like, I was like, wait, what? Yeah. And not only does someone who's an important character just get shot, but another person you met along the way who is a innocent victim who needs someone to fight for this person ends up getting into the position that they don't want to be in at the end. Like, the bad guy wins, essentially. And it's the way it happens is so quick because it's a series of things that happen, and then you realize that, you know, people in charge own the police. And so what, like, who's good? It's almost like the end of Cry Wolf. Who's going to believe you, right? Like based on who's here. It's like.
Very few movies have made me feel like the world is a terrible place and none of us know what to do with it.
Yeah. The end of that film, I was just like, oh my God. Yeah. Also, there's a famous thing that I've heard and I didn't understand the reference. My sister and my daughter, I'll just say that if you know that, you'll know. But otherwise, I understand that reference now. It's a very good movie. I feel like the mystery is actually really interesting. Like, you kind of, as he keeps finding out more, you really want to know what's going on. And at times you're not sure if you trust Faye Dunaway, you're not sure if you trust a lot of different people. Yeah. And you really do just kind of want to get to the bottom of this damn thing, because the more he investigates, the more it just keeps opening up to bigger issues. So you're like, what the hell is going on? You know? Yeah. And the overall plot's actually kind of interesting. It's pretty cool. And the crazy thing is, but at the end of the movie, the plot, the whole big thing is meaningless compared to what happens at the end.
Exactly.
And that's what's so tragic about it. And it does follow this. And that was the first of these new wave films that I watched on this. And it did remind me. And I was like, oh yeah, like these movies are going to be very,
gonna be tough.
And I like that though. I like that.
Yeah.
But the ending, it genuinely left me jaw dropped because everything happened so fast.
Yeah.
Like when the horn's going off and the car's slowing down, I was like, no. Like I was literally like, no.
Yeah.
And then it's bloody. Like it is awful. And this is like someone you care about, and they look awful. Like it's bad. Like and it's Chinatown. It's a good movie.
That's how the movie ends. It's Chinatown.
Yeah, like I wasn't gonna go into too deep in detail about this movie. That's why I'm kind of fine that you left this to the end, because it's a film where it's just a great movie all the way through, and then the ending kind of just leaves you jaw dropped, and there's no explanation. There's no. That's just how it is, and the world is sometimes really fucked up and really unfair. Like it's that simple. Like you said it.
It is, and that's what a lot of these movies were giving to the audiences of their time. The world is darker than Hollywood has kind of given you in the past.
So if anything, they were just being more honest, which probably was a breath of fresh air, and still is.
To some, and also repulsive to others.
Yeah, but I personally would rather know what's really happening personally than just being I mean, it's nice to be in a fantasy that makes you feel good sometimes, for sure. Yeah. But I also want people who are willing to push the boundaries and make something interesting, maybe taboo, maybe scary, something to talk about that's worth talking about. Because I feel like when you don't discuss things, there's no chance of improvement. There's no chance of change. Even subjects you don't like discussing, those are the ones you need to be discussing the most, really. Like, because otherwise nothing changes. Everything stays the same. So.
And on top of that, verify the information you hear, especially if it's information that you're inclined to agree with.
I agree. Like, don't just adopt it because that's on my side. That sounds good. It's like make sure it's right. You know, like for real. Because even people on your side can be wrong, and it's really important to speak the truth.
Speak the truth. Well, thanks for hanging out with us for this episode. I was super excited, and this was a really fun conversation. I hope that throughout our talks that you got some excitement built around this era of movies, the ones we watched and some that maybe we didn't have a chance to kind of dive into.
For sure.
But if you're curious about, those boundary pushing films that probably influenced a lot of your favorite movies today, look to the late 60s, look to the early 70s. I can't think of a better time in movies when it comes to character work.
Yeah, it's a really great era. It was a great experience for me too. I've realized that I've actually seen more than I thought, but seeing some of the films that are on my list are great, and I actually have a lot more to watch. And also for those of you that do want to experience more of the Hollywood New Wave era without worrying that you're not watching the right ones, if you type Hollywood New Wave films on Google, it will give you a list at the top of a lot of the top movies from that era. There's like 30, 40 of them that it'll give you that are like all the biggest hits of that era. So if you just type Hollywood New Wave films, I think there's like a Wikipedia page on it, but also Google will just list a bunch of them for you. So if you guys want to watch some of them and maybe let us know in the comments if what you thought about them, what are some of your takes on the films? Maybe there are some that you think we both haven't seen yet, maybe that we need to watch, but let us know.
On top of that, check out Quentin Tarantino's new book. If you haven't seen it, check out his film, both titled Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. They're both a blast. I can't say how much I've enjoyed experiencing both this story and both of these mediums, because they were both unique enough to carry my attention the whole way.
Definitely. Yeah. I'm definitely going to finish it. So, because I love the movie, and now that you've told me that, I definitely want to see more. Yeah. Also, I have to take a moment to shameless plug. I actually did just launch my YouTube channel. It is called A Restless Mind. Thank you.
Yep.
But it's called A Restless Mind, where I'm doing film reviews, some of my own film reviews on things. I'm also going to be doing video essays. I'm doing some montages. I might do some shorts. Who knows? But it's basically going to be my channel that I'm going to be putting a lot of work into as well. And I'm also trying to make sure people from my channel know about this podcast. Mm-hmm. So, Cinescussion and A Restless Mind. I'll be in both places.
Just as another plug for A Restless Mind, Iconium on Horror is my favorite video you've produced so far.
Thank you. Thank you.
Great work.
Yeah, I appreciate you. Yeah, the Encomium series is just... Encomium is essentially like... it's almost like a love letter to something. So I did one on action, one on horror. I'm also going to be doing like an Encomium on drama, which drama has actually been a little bit more interesting because drama exists in every genre of film. So It's essentially just dramatic moments and things that I've loved. So yeah.
Feeling, emotion.
Yes. A big part of storytelling.
Well, thanks for hanging out with us for another episode. We're getting ready to sign off. We will come back to you in a couple weeks with another fun episode.
For sure. We actually don't know what it's going to be yet, so I guess it'll be a surprise to you guys.
I have a whole laundry list of ideas. We'll probably pick one from a hat. Or
I have a few too, so yeah, we'll figure something out good for all of you.
Perfect. Well, until a couple weeks, thanks everyone for tuning in, and we hope you have a great couple weeks.
Agreed. I'll catch you guys later. Bye.
Bye.